So if you thought that the United States had become a global laughingstock thanks to Donald Trump before 3 days ago, then the U.S. is really doubly a laughingstock right now. The world is literally laughing at the United States because we have a dangerous fool as president who is still supported by tens of millions of Americans, who recently suggested we should look into injecting bleach and isopropyl alcohol to treat coronavirus. Here is the chief medical officer in Australia, Brendan Murphy, struggling. If you're watching, you'll see him visibly struggling not to laugh as he takes a question from the Australian media about Donald Trump talking about hitting the body internally with heat, light, and disinfectants during Thursday's White House coronavirus press briefing last week.
Professor, today at a briefing, Donald Trump said that, quote, a tremendous hit, unquote, of ultraviolet light could see off the virus. He also referenced the effectiveness of disinfectant and wondered whether injections of disinfectant might also be effective. Given that this is coming from the President of the United States, an influential person, is there any scientific basis to either of these propositions?
I would caution against the injection of disinfection. They could be quite toxic to people. I wasn't privy to his comments, so I want to be very careful about commenting on something that I didn't hear myself. Certainly, and ultraviolet light. Look, I don't know the context in which he said it, so I really would need to study it and before I could comment. Thank you.
If you watched the clip, you see the Australian chief medical officer having difficulty to avoid bursting out laughing because that's what the world is currently doing. They're laughing at us. And some also just feel really bad for us. I got a number of nice messages over the weekend, including from friends of mine in other countries, Netherlands, Italy, other spots, from family in Argentina, from viewers in Canada, all who are essentially saying, we're really sorry for what you're dealing with. We're all dealing with the virus, but you, in addition to that, are dealing with Donald Trump. Here's the UK Deputy Chief Medical Officer also asked about disinfectant injections. Now Donald Trump being treated globally as a vector of disinformation that must be debunked time and again.
Just wanted to come back on one more thing. Many people in the UK will have seen the clip overnight of the President of the United States suggesting coronavirus might be treated by injecting disinfectant into the body. Do you have a message to Donald Trump about the dangers of spreading dangerous disinformation when governments around the world are trying to combat its spread from other sources?
Here I'll defer to medical expertise. Jenny.
So I wouldn't have a specific message to Donald Trump. I'd have a specific message to anybody who suggested they should be injecting anything into their bodies. Clearly, we would not support, from a medical professional perspective, it is really important that people use appropriate treatments that are evidence-based and tested. We have very good programmes that have been taken up very rapidly, coordinated in this country, testing various different alternative treatments. Those trials will report reasonably early, but certainly nobody should be injecting anything, and we should be using evidence-based and properly trialled treatments that we know will be safe.
World disclaimers and corporations like the makers of Lysol having to clarify, no, don't even think about doing this. Here's Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, also having to answer a similar question, actually saying what Trump said could be dangerous.
There's a big responsibility on all leaders right now. There's always a responsibility on leaders, but it's greater than ever during a crisis like this. And I've said it today, I said it yesterday, I'm really keen that we have an open discussion with the public, and that politicians, unusually perhaps, are prepared to admit things they don't know, as well as share the thinking on the things that we do know and are trying to work through. But the responsibility on leaders is not to stand up in a public platform and repeat things that you have perhaps half heard and perhaps completely misunderstood, and present that to the public in a way that the public might act on, and that could be dangerous. And none of us are perfect. We will all make mistakes in this, but I think we all have to remember that very serious responsibility when we're giving advice to the public. It must be good advice, informed by the best science. And as Jason has just said, it is clearly not the case that ingesting disinfectant in any way, shape or form is a good idea. It is a very, very bad idea and extremely dangerous.
And there are more from all around the world. I won't play them all for you today, but this is now what the world is dealing with. We're all dealing with the virus, and the world is having to come together. Corporate America and foreign leaders all having to come together to say, when Trump wondered aloud about injecting disinfectants, that was a bad idea. Don't do it. Some of them are having trouble not laughing when they're asked about it. You also, by the way, have poison control centers receiving phone calls. One example is from Maryland. The governor, Larry Hogan in Maryland, is a Republican. He's no left-wing bomb thrower, not a Democrat. Said Trump was sending the wrong message with the Bleach fiasco, and that his state over the weekend received hundreds of calls wondering if it is safe to ingest cleaning products as a result of Donald Trump's statement. Check out the Republican governor here explaining it.
Many of your citizens didn't see it as sarcasm. Is that how you took it?
Well, look, I think it's really important. This has been important to me from day one about communicating very clearly on the facts, because people listen to these press conferences. They listen when the governor holds a press conference, and they certainly pay attention when the president of the United States is standing there giving a press conference about something as serious as this worldwide pandemic. And I think when misinformation comes out, or you just say something that pops in your head, it does send a wrong message. And we had hundreds of calls come into our emergency hotline at our health department asking if it was it was right to ingest Clorox or alcohol cleaning products, whether that was going to help them fight the virus. So we had to put out that warning to make sure that people were not doing something like that, which would kill people actually to do it.
So that's what happens when the guy who thinks the Nobel Prize is the Nobel Prize, N-O-B-L-E, it gets really bad. And it's gotten very, very bad. And again, an unforced error. And we will see what today's press briefing looks like after all of this. Donald Trump's former White House communications director, Anthony Scaramucci, has again admitted something, which I've been covering for years at this point, which is that Donald Trump has difficulty reading. He really doesn't read, and he struggles to read. Anthony Scaramucci has been doing interviews recently. He's been more honest than maybe we are used to hearing from people who worked for Trump or who work for Trump. And he's admitted to a number of things, including that Donald Trump can't read very well. Check out this clip from an interview with Anand Giridharadas, who's been a previous guest on the David Pakman show as well.
I'm not a diagnostician, but my guess is that he probably had an undiagnosed learning disability as a kid. Maybe it's a form of dyslexia or something like that. And so his reading comprehension levels are not where his IQ possibly is. Okay, now he's in decline right now, but you'd have to stipulate that he's a reasonably smart guy. I mean, he built a business, he built a television show, he made a name for himself, and in 17 short months, he went from being a reality television star to the presidency of the United States. So we have to stipulate that there's intelligence in there, but it's what kind of intelligence.
So Scaramucci is obviously not saying it in as definitive or aggressive terms as we have suggested before, but Scaramucci also knows that Trump struggles to read, and he makes it clear there. This is not making fun of people. This is not making fun of learning disabilities. This is simply pointing out, don't we need a president who can read well and regularly reads? We suspect Trump hasn't read a book in his adult life. There's no evidence that Trump has read a book in his adult life. He's never mentioned reading anything other than his own book, Art of the Deal, which he didn't write. Tony Schwartz wrote it. And the Bible, which, if you believe Trump reads the Bible, okay, I may have a bridge to sell you. But remember that I've been covering this for years, and there's interest in it and a lot of agreement. Back in February of 2017, we did a story called Trump Fails Basic Literacy Test. It got nearly 3.4 million views on YouTube, another 7 million on Facebook. This was subsequently picked up around the world, including in France and other countries, and it explains a lot. Now, not being able to read well doesn't mean Trump's a bad person. Not being able to read well doesn't mean Trump is wrong on policy. He is usually wrong on policy, but for other reasons. But it explains a lot, to quote Donald Trump. including things like this from earlier this week.
Dickinson, Hologic, and Cephahide.
This reading deficit has been widely corroborated. Saturday Night Live's Pete Davidson said when Trump was hosting SNL, Trump couldn't seem to read the scripts. I've played this clip for you before.
What happened with the Trumpster?
Okay, so he's like, he doesn't really know how to read.
For real.
Yeah, and he loves to improv.
Yeah.
So during like the table read, he like, before like we were gonna read each, before he had to read each line, and he's the host, so he's at everything.
Yeah.
He would go, I'm not gonna say this. I think I'm gonna say it the way I want to say it. Is that okay? Is that okay, Lauren? Is that everything? And everybody's like, what? And then this is my favorite part is there was a sketch that we wrote where he's at Disneyland with his daughter, and the line is, all right, let's get out of here. Turkey legs? Like, let's go get turkey legs? And he doesn't know how to read. So he went, all right, let's get out of here, turkey legs. He called his daughter turkey legs.
Maybe that was his improv.
Oh, no, it wasn't. And then he looked up, like, he doesn't get it. Like, he thinks if everybody's laughing with him, but we're all laughing at him.
So that's not new. We've covered that previously. Noel Casler worked with Trump on The Apprentice and says Trump couldn't read, although with Noel Casler, it seemed maybe it was more about Trump's inability to sit still rather than simply not being able to read. Noel Casler, we've heard about the possible uppers stuff with The Apprentice. So the point is, we know from sources inside the White House, Trump's presidential daily briefings have been reduced from what's normally many pages of text to just a couple of pages, to just one page, to just one page that is half charts and graphs. And even that Trump is accepting with low frequency. So this is not good. And the reason it's not good is because it's tough to be informed if you're not reading a lot as president. That's how Barack Obama was informed. That's how George W. Bush read a lot. He read political material. He also just read books. We know that. Doesn't mean Bush is a great guy. Doesn't mean he was a great president. But he was reading at least. He came to many wrong decisions, but he was reading. Bill Clinton spent a ton of time reading intelligence, reporting, books, etc. Trump simply doesn't do it. And all politics aside, that's a fundamental liability when you're president of the United States. It's sad more than anything, but it has a real effect on Trump's ability to be a leader. And it's not a good effect. I'll tell you that right now. It sort of pains me to say this because we've been saying for months, we need to be primarily led by doctors about the virus, not by politicians. But Dr. Deborah Birx has become a primary disseminator of laughable Trumpian propaganda. And Dr. Birx is no longer a trustworthy source of information in this entire thing. It doesn't mean everything she says is wrong, but she is no longer a trustworthy source overall. Dr. Deborah Birx actually defended Donald Trump's outrageous comment about bleach injections as Trump talking out loud and having dialogue in real time as he synthesizes and assimilates data that he has been presented. Now, there is a really important tell here in the video I'm about to play for you that what Dr. Birx is saying is BS. Let's look. The video is very short. It's 25 seconds. See if you can pick out the tell that Dr. Birx is being dishonest.
No, when he gets new information, he likes to talk that through out loud and really have that dialogue. And so that's what dialogue he was having. I think he just saw the information at the time, immediately before the press conference, and he was still digesting that information.
So the tell there that shows us that Dr. Birx is being dishonest is that she had the idea to say, oh, Trump had just seen this information for the first time, meaning a minute before he made this crazy bleach comment. But the problem is that Donald Trump said during the meeting, during the briefing, he had already received this briefing about disinfectants earlier in the day. And as Dr. Birx is saying, or about to say, Trump was reacting in real time as he learned about this. She realizes, wait a second, I can't say that because that would contradict Trump. Trump already said during the briefing, I got this briefing earlier and I thought it was so interesting, I wanted it presented here. So in real time, Dr. Birx extends her sentence and says, I think he just saw the information at the time, pause, immediately before the press conference. Check out that pause as Dr. Birx realizes, oh, wait a second, I need to say more or this is going to be obviously a lie.
And so that's what dialogue he was having. I think he just saw the information at the time, immediately before the press conference, and he was still digesting that information.
So she is now a Trump brown-noser. She's refusing to tell it like it is on premature reopenings. She resisted saying that it was a concerning decision that Florida made 10 days ago to reopen beaches or whenever it was. And remember that she also made this absolutely insane claim a few weeks ago about how Donald Trump just uses data to make decisions and all of this stuff that we simply know is not true and Trump has no attention span for.
How would you describe the job President Trump is doing behind the scenes and in front of the cameras during these daily briefings that we're seeing? What's been your perspective, Dr. Birx?
He's been so attentive to the scientific literature and the details and the data. And I think his ability to analyze and integrate data that comes out of his long history in business has really been a real benefit during these discussions about medical issues. Because in the end, data is data, and he understands the importance of the granularity. And I think he's been really excited about finding the level of detail that we've been able to now bring over the last few weeks to really understand who's at the greatest risk for severe illness.
What? Trump is analyzing data at a granular level to understand the details of this pandemic. That interview was back when Trump had more recently said, we have 15 cases and we will soon have 0. This is the Trump that last week wondered aloud about injecting bleach and isopropyl alcohol to treat coronavirus. Obviously, it's a lie. Trump has been the opposite of what Dr. Deborah Birx claims. So we've talked before about a doctor making this calculation that if they disagree with Trump too much, they get fired. And if they get fired, they get replaced by some total Trump sycophant, and the country is worse off. Dr. Fauci made it clear. He said, listen, I can't jump in front of the microphone every single time Trump says something and correct him. It's just not feasible. But as you've seen, Dr. Fauci has been sidelined from the press briefings for a while now. Dr. Birx has gone fully into not just I won't contradict Trump when he lies. She's starting to do this sort of sycophantic stuff that reminds me of Donald Trump's crazy letter from his doctor saying Trump would be the healthiest president ever. That's the type of disinformation that Dr. Birx is now a part of. And it's terrible because we are at a desperate deficit of actual trustworthy medical professionals that are administration adjacent. Unfortunately, Dr. Birx can no longer be trusted. And there are people writing to me saying, Birx has Stockholm syndrome. She's starting to side with her captor. I don't know about that. The only thing that could be said is Dr. Birx believes that she can do more as a part of the task force than out of it. And she believes that she has to be saying these things about Trump, as transparently unbelievable as they are, in order to remain on the task force. That's the most optimistic interpretation of what Dr. Birx has been saying. But to go on Christian broadcasting and say Trump synthesizes data in this great way and other transparently untrue things, it seems like it's overkill. Let me know what you believe is going on with Dr. Birx, what explains her behavior. And also let me know what you think is going on with Dr. Fauci, who's been missing from the press briefings for more than a week now, despite Donald Trump every once in a while alluding to or even saying straight up, oh, yeah, Tony was part of the meeting earlier. What do you make of that? I want to hear from you. And we will have continued coverage of this and other stories from today's program on the David Pakman Show Instagram page. If you are on Instagram, you can do much worse than following at David Pakman Show on Instagram. So let's continue to get caught up about the aftermath of Donald Trump wondering aloud about injecting bleach and isopropyl alcohol as a possible treatment for coronavirus. He said it. He floated the idea that it was sarcasm. That failed. So Friday, he left the press briefing without taking a single question. We then learned he would be reducing the number and duration of press briefings. But more importantly, Trump spent the entire weekend rage tweeting attacks on media for all of this. And that's the move. He tried claiming it was sarcasm and that failed. He, denying that he ever said it has obviously failed since we have cameras in 2020 and we can record things. So Trump spent the whole weekend with dozens of tweets, including some that he has deleted out of shame, attacking the media for all of this. Once again, another of Trump's authoritarian, totalitarian tendencies, attack the press constantly for everything while never taking responsibility. So let's take a look, a tour through Trump's weekend rage tweeting, starting with lies about virus testing. Trump saying many testing sites are and have been open and available. Just past 5 million tests, far more than any other country in the world. In fact, more than all other major countries combined. Don't believe the fake news. Now, that's just a short statement, but it's riddled with lies. First of all, what matters is testing per capita. We are 41st in testing per capita. The total number of tests doesn't matter that much. But also remember that the Trump administration promised that we would have done more than 20 million tests by the end of March. It's the end of April, and we've done only 5 million. But Trump insists it's the media that is lying to you. No, he's the one lying to you. Then going into Bleach injection, saying, quote, was just informed that the fake news from the Thursday White House press conference had me speaking and asking questions of Dr. Birx. Wrong, I was speaking to our laboratory expert, not Deborah, about sunlight, etc., and the coronavirus. The lamestream media is corrupt and sick. Now, of course, the video is very clear. Trump turns to her and literally says, Deborah, have you heard of injecting heat and light? And she says, well, there is this thing called fever. So again, it's another lie, but a pointless lie. It's neither here nor there in Trump wondering aloud about bleach and isopropyl injections. Then maybe Trump's key tweet of the weekend, now defending why he won't be doing press briefings. Of course, the real reason he's going to pare them down is it's become an embarrassment. He says it's because of the media, tweeting, quote, what is the purpose of having White House news conferences when the lamestream media asks nothing but hostile questions and then refuses to report the truth or facts accurately? They get record ratings and the American people get nothing but fake news, not worth the time and effort. He said something that is the source of international shame for the United States. That's why he's being advised to pare down the meetings. But he attacks the media as the reason. And unfortunately, it probably works with many of his followers. Another media attack. Remember, this is the president in the midst of a pandemic, spending his entire weekend tweeting stuff like this, saying, quote, I never said the pandemics was a hoax. Who would do such a thing? I said that the do-nothing Democrats, together with their mainstream media partners, are the hoax. They have been called out and embarrassed on this, even admitting they were wrong, but continue to spread the lie. Remember, it's Trump who's been called out and embarrassed internationally for saying, what about injecting bleach? And of course, he did refer to it as a hoax many times. Then, amid numerous well-sourced reports that Trump has recently been watching 5 to 7 hours of news every morning before strolling into work at noon, Trump says, quote, the people that know me and know the history of our country say that I am the hardest working president in history. I don't know about that, but I am a hard worker and have probably gotten more done in the first 3.5 years than any president in history. The fake news hates it. That one, obviously a lie, but we don't really need to debunk it. And then this is the cherry on top, a 3-tweet gong show where he said, and subsequently deleted because of the embarrassing misspellings, when will all of the reporters who have received Nobel prizes, and I'm saying not Nobel, Noble, N-O-B-L-E, Nobel prizes for their work on Russia, only to have been proven totally wrong, and in fact it was the other side who committed the crimes, be turning back their cherished Nobles, again, N-O-B-L-E-S, so that they can be given to the real reporters and journalists who got it right. I can give the committee a very comprehensive list. When will the Nobel Committee demand the prizes back? This is one sentence, folks. Especially since they were gotten under fraud. The reporters and lamestream media knew the truth all along. Lawsuits should be brought against all, including the fake news organizations, that's capital F, capital N, capital O, to rectify this terrible injustice. For all of the great lawyers out there, do they have any takers? When will the Nobel Committee act, that's a capital A on act, better be fast? Those were deleted, I assume because of Noble versus Nobel, but also maybe because it is the agit trash that you would expect someone on Ambien or some other kind of medication to be tweeting out, not the president of the United States in the middle of a Sunday afternoon. An entire weekend after a globally embarrassing debacle, attacking media and press as the source of his problems. This is not a well man. We're going to do a deep dive later in the week about how this has become a sort of last straw for a lot of people around the world to realize that this man is fundamentally unwell. But what matters here in the U.S. is whether our voters realize it. People in Germany realizing Trump is sick doesn't really help remove him in November. If Americans who don't vote realize Trump is sick, it also doesn't help remove him in November. People who are going to vote or who can be convinced to vote, they are the ones who need to realize it. And I don't know that they are. This is kind of a funny coda to the Trump bleach injection fiasco. After Trump wondered aloud about whether disinfectants like isopropyl, alcohol, and bleach could be injected or otherwise introduced into the body to treat coronavirus, a whole bunch of Trumpists denied that he said it. The next day, Trump admitted to saying it, but he claimed it was sarcasm. And then he took no press questions at a press briefing later that day. And Trumpists are now dealing with conflicting defenses. Some are saying he never said it. Others are saying it was sarcasm. And Trump admitted to saying it and says it was sarcasm. But it doesn't appear Trump knows what sarcasm is. Maybe shockingly, longtime Fox News and Fox Business anchor Neil Cavuto, plain and simple, just admitted Trump wasn't joking. This wasn't sarcasm. And it's extra funny, by the way, to hear Neil Cavuto reading the quote off of a transcript. Let's indulge together.
Remarks yesterday when he talked about injecting people with disinfectant, nor were we imagining the incredulous looks he got from his medical team when he made the suggestion. There was nothing in those comments yesterday that hinted of the dismissal he was giving today. Now, he did wave it aside that was not what he intended, but that is what he said, that injecting people with disinfectant for coronavirus showed some great promise. He said, I think you said you're going to test that too. And it sounds interesting. He went on to say, then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, in 1 minute. Is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets in the lungs. Here he's referring to the coronavirus, and it does a tremendous number on the lungs. Again, referring to the coronavirus. He said it would be interesting to check that so that you're going to have to use medical doctors with this, but it sounds interesting to me. He is talking about injecting products like Lysol into your body to see if that can combat the disease. That is what he said. Now, he might be dialing that back today. I don't know why he just didn't say, look, I screwed up, I got it wrong. That wasn't my intention. This is an important medical distinction, so much so that the makers of Lysol came out and said, no. Do not inject our product into your body.
Notice how Neil Cavuto says Trump should have just said, hey, I got it wrong. I was just wrong on this one. Where has Neil Cavuto been for the last 20 years, and especially the last 3.5 with Donald Trump as president? Has Trump ever just showed up and said, I misspoke. I was wrong about X, Y, and Z? No, he took a Sharpie and modified a weather map when saying I was just wrong would have been the right thing to do. Now, one other thing about Cavuto. Cavuto actually goes on to debunk Trump's claim that only Chinese studies are saying hydroxychloroquine might be bad for people taking coronavirus. Here's Cavuto saying, this is data from our own FDA that says it might be time to cut it with the hydroxy.
Secondly, he goes on to say on these findings, they're still unresolved on hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine. It was the FDA, not a study in China, that said that COVID-19 outside of hospital settings or clinical trials is not to be combined with any treatments of hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine, that having them outside of these venues, there is a high risk of heart rhythm problems. I just want to very clarify that these were not some outside entities. This was the FDA saying, whoa, outside of these settings, there are risks. So this other study that has got some worried that maybe the president was trying to dismiss that, has to do with the use of this to treat those with this condition. Now, the president has often said that with hydroxychloroquine and these others, what have you got to lose? Well, in a VA study of a few hundred of our veterans, the risk is they have to lose their lives.
Neil Cavuto has, of course, since been fired by Fox News. I'm kidding. But I do want to be careful here, because Cavuto has been a vector of disinformation for decades on Fox News. He's been on Fox News for 20, I think since day one, since 1996. So we don't need to go out of our way to praise him big picture, the same way that just because Trump is wildly more cartoonishly sick than Bush was, we don't need to go out of our way to praise George W. Bush. But Cavuto spent a bunch of Friday's show debunking Trump's lies, which is good because that's the audience that needs to hear it most acutely. The other angle is that we're increasingly seeing Fox concerned just about the legal repercussions of how they've portrayed coronavirus from day one. There's a study released last week that suggests if you watch Sean Hannity more than Tucker, you were more likely to get the virus, which sort of tracks with Hannity being much more flippant and minimizing of the risk from coronavirus. So this stuff has a real impact. If Neil Cavuto really wanted to do the full story, it would include mentioning that if Trump was joking when he said inject bleach, that's one question. But if he was joking, what is the joke? Like, what's the punchline there? Watching this is a very weird experience because the tone of Neil Cavuto's voice is almost like he's surprised that Trump lied multiple times during the press briefing. Trump's been lying during every single one of these press briefings since day one. Good for Neil Cavuto for calling out two lies, that it was sarcastic and that hydroxy is working. But still, big picture, Neil Cavuto seems surprised that these press briefings are nothing but opportunities to disseminate lies and disinformation. We're going to have clips from all of this on our Instagram page, so make sure you're following us on Instagram at David Pakman Show. I also, on my personal Instagram, will be posting a time lapse of my tomato plants rising like the phoenix to like about an inch sprout. Anyway, that's on my Instagram at david.pakman. So, of course, we have to talk about the Donald Trump bleach injection fiasco that over the weekend has turned from an offhanded dumb comment into really a catalyst of absolute international shame, which has pushed Donald Trump into hiding over the weekend in the midst of a global pandemic, which he had mismanaged from the get-go and is now set to surpass this week the total number of deaths that Donald Trump has been predicting. Donald Trump, of course, talking about 60,000 coronavirus deaths. The United States already, as of right now, at almost 56,000, and every indication that we will surpass that number this week. And we have now this unforced error, once again, of bleach injection. So please allow me some time in today's show to really go through some of the different elements of this. And to catch you up, if you checked out of the news altogether for the last 72 hours, you may not have heard of this, but otherwise you probably know that Donald Trump wondered aloud in this tone which he has perfected, which is a tone that implies his ideas are absolute genius and how has nobody else thought of this stuff. Trump wondered aloud, what if we injected disinfectants like bleach and isopropyl alcohol, which were the ones just previously in the press briefing mentioned and put up on screen? What if we introduce those into the body through injection or some other means to treat coronavirus? Now, of course, these are toxic chemicals. They have large warning labels on them saying this can kill you. Don't drink this. Don't ingest this in any way. Here's the source of the insanity that kicked off the last 3 or 4 days of madness.
We hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light. And I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting.
Get the right folks who could.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number of the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds It sounds interesting to me. So we'll see. But the whole concept of the light, the way it kills it in 1 minute, that's pretty powerful.
Absolute international embarrassment. We'll discuss that international global shame momentarily. Shockingly, or maybe not, Trumpists immediately started falling over themselves to defend Donald Trump. Some started saying he never said it. He simply never said it. Others suggesting, well, it was a joke. Others saying it was taken completely out of context. And unfortunately, this is one of those cases where the more context you get, the more clear it is that it was accurately reported. Now, there are people saying that Trump could have simply meant different disinfectants. Like, for example, he could have meant medical grade antivirals, which disinfect the body or whatever. No, here's a picture that was on the screen moments before Trump used the word. It clearly says commonly available disinfectants, bleach and isopropyl alcohol. Trump turns around and talks about the disinfectants you're talking about, putting them in the body instead of using them to disinfect a desk, for example. That's what he meant. So, of course, he said it. Now, at one crazy moment, Donald Trump turns to Dr. Deborah Birx and asks her, what about applying heat and light to treat this? Dr. Birx, in the way only she can, as an unfortunately growing vector of disinformation for Donald Trump, she bails Trump out by saying, well, there is this thing called fever. That's sort of like heat in the body, right? Check it out.
I have to say, covers a lot more territory than just this. This is probably an easy thing, relatively speaking, for you. I would like you to speak to the medical doctors to see if there's any way that you can apply light and heat to cure. You know, that if you could. And maybe you can, maybe you can't. Again, I say maybe you can, maybe you can't. I'm not a doctor. But I'm like a person that has a good, you know what.
But, sir, you're the president.
Deborah, have you ever heard of that? The heat and the light relative to certain viruses, yes, but relative to this virus?
Not as a treatment. I mean, certainly fever is a good thing when you have a fever. It helps your body respond. But not as, I've not seen heat or light.
I think it's a great thing to look at. I mean, you know. Okay.
And then here is Dr. Stephen Hahn, the FDA commissioner, having to answer questions during an interview with CNN's Anderson Cooper and Dr. Sanjay Gupta about this. If you are watching, pay particularly close attention to the expression, the look on Dr. Sanjay Gupta's face as this insanity is going on. I will remind you, this is not a simulation. This is not a drill. This is real life.
I mean, is there any evidence about taking a disinfectant that's used, you know, on the table where I'm sitting and using it internally? That doesn't seem like a good idea from my, I mean, am I wrong?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point you're making. We certainly wouldn't want, as a physician, someone to take matters in their own hands. I think this is something that a patient would want to talk to their physician about. And no, I certainly wouldn't recommend the internal ingestion of a disinfectant. Again, this is a conversation that occurs every day in America between a patient and a doctor. I've been in that position. I'm sure Dr. Gupta has as well. And it's really important that we address them because people will ask those questions of us.
Well, Dr. Hahn, I think we should be clear, though, that the idea of doing some kind of UV light therapy, which is sometimes used for local issues in the body, but not for a widespread viral infection, and the idea of injecting disinfectant, I mean, there's no those questions may be getting asked, but there's absolutely no merit to that. That doesn't need to be studied. You can already say that doesn't work, right?
And I think, Sanjay, that is exactly what a patient would say to a doctor, and that would be the answer of the medical experts to anybody who answered that question.
Right. Questions like, should I inject bleach, are questions really meant for doctor and patient. That's where those, thank you, Dr. Hahn, for clearing that up. Absolutely shocking. So the end result is that Donald Trump, during Friday's press briefing, the day after this took place, abruptly ended it and walked out without answering a single question. We learned that right before the briefing, Trump staffers came out and they tried to reposition CNN reporter Caitlin Collins to the back of the room. Normally she sits near the front. Clearly they were expecting her to ask about this, as she should. And the reporters agreed, we decide where we sit. You don't decide where it is that we sit. And after they refused to switch places, after CNN reporter Caitlin Collins refused to be pushed to the back of the room, Donald Trump simply left without taking a single question, something he's not done since the start of the press briefings. Take a look.
I truly do believe the day will soon come when we will heal our land and we'll be able to reopen America and put this great nation back to work. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Mr. President?
Mr. President, now the time for sarcasm.
So typically when Trump raps, you get 30 minutes, 60 minutes, sometimes even more of Trump answering questions. Trump instead just leaving. Now, a couple of other things. We'll talk more about Trump being in hiding momentarily. But Donald Trump has been hugely triggered by all of this. And we don't know what the form or frequency of future briefings will be. One was scheduled for today. We don't know whether questions will be taken. We know that people around Trump are telling him, you're doing yourself more harm than good with these. This is not good. But in the meantime, notice the degree to which simply quoting Trump verbatim triggers his supporters. Over the weekend, I got into a crazy back and forth on Twitter with Dilbert cartoonist Scott Adams, who has become a big vector of disinformation in defense of Trump. And he ended up angrily blocking me. You can look at the Twitter history of it if it's interesting to you. But he was increasingly triggered merely by people telling him, you're just denying what Trump said. Here's the quote. Oh, it's missing context. Here's more context. And it is exactly as reported, Trump wondering aloud, what if we take the disinfectants you're talking about and put them into the body? Let's next discuss Donald Trump in hiding. At some point tomorrow, I might devote some time to talking about how Dr. Deborah Birx has really become a vector of Donald Trump disinformation, covering up his incompetence and suggesting he has a clue. But for today, I want to talk more generally about the fact that doctors are being pushed out of the picture when it comes to Trump's White House coronavirus task force, and that Dr. Anthony Fauci has essentially been disappeared by Donald Trump from the press briefings. Over time, Fauci has had a smaller and smaller role. He used to stand on the stage in view of the cameras. Then he was on the stage out of view of the cameras, but he would come up if asked a question. Then he would sit on the side and come up if someone had a question. Lately, he's just not been at the briefings at all. Now, in conjunction with this, we have a new report that this is part of a calculated trend where Donald Trump is going to be pushing doctors away from the briefings. And instead, the briefings, as we know, we don't know whether questions will or won't even be allowed after Thursday's fiasco, but it is going to be an economically based briefing. And I'm guessing part of that is if you only talk about economics, you reduce the chances of wondering aloud about injecting bleach. If there's one person who should be at every briefing, it's Dr. Anthony Fauci. He's been running infectious disease for the U.S. for 35 years. He's actually an expert on global pandemic. He's actually a medical doctor. He had been at almost every one of the first 45 or so briefings, and then suddenly he's gone. We know why it's happening. The more of a fool that Trump makes out of himself, the more Anthony Fauci is asked to contradict Donald Trump. And Fauci's been careful. We've talked about this before. Fauci has said, I can't jump up every time Trump says something wrong and interrupt the president and correct him. He would be fired if he did that. And Fauci, my guess is, has calculated his presence and his role being maintained in any form is better than being fired and being replaced with some kind of total Trump sycophant who may not even really know anything about infectious disease. So more and more now, Fauci, questions are being asked to Trump. You said X and Dr. Fauci said Y. Can you explain that? Are you not on the same page? And Trump tends to say, I didn't see it. I don't know what Anthony said. They are now pulling Fauci further away. And the defense from the White House is Fauci does lots of other things other than just go to the briefings. He has many other responsibilities. Well, okay, but didn't he have those responsibilities during the 45 meetings he did attend for more than a month until he was just disappeared? And we know why it's being done. Fauci continues to say we need to ramp up testing dramatically. Trump says testing is fine and we have the most in the world. Of course, we're 42nd in testing per capita. Trump said in a recent briefing, the virus may not come back in the fall. Dr. Fauci said in that same briefing, we will have coronavirus with us in the fall. And then in the midst of all this about Fauci, we learn that the White House wants to just get away from doctors altogether at the briefing and talk about economics instead. White House official telling Axios that the press briefings will continue, but that the virus stuff will take a back seat, if you can imagine, while economic stuff and a more forward-looking message talking about opening her up and stuff like that is what we are going to hear. So that's code for stocks and reopening and V-shaped recovery discussions rather than death toll, vaccinations, therapeutics. And it's an election-focused strategy. Axios reports that there are officials who have told Trump, this is hurting you. The press briefings are hurting you. And your polling against Biden, in particular among older Americans, is imploding. So the bottom line of the strategy is the longer this goes on, it's worse for Trump. That's clear. If the press briefings become a daily reminder that Trump just keeps bragging about the same things every day, the death toll stays high and continues climbing, that's bad for Trump in November. The November election will be a Trump referendum, but it's going to be more a referendum on the economy than on the virus. And what I mean by that is Trump has obviously bungled the virus response, but changing your vote based on the virus response does not seem hugely likely for reasons we discussed last week with Rachel Bitecofer. On the other hand, we know one of the main things that determines does an incumbent president get reelected or removed is the perception of the state of the economy around the time of the election. This would explain why Trump would move to an economic message while doctors continue to be pushed into the background. Tomorrow, we'll have an updated report on testing. And in the meantime, I would love for Dr. Fauci to start doing his own daily updates on YouTube. My guess is he would be fired for that. So what we have is a global 100-year pandemic. The United States is choosing to sideline the medical professionals to talk about stocks and reopening barbershops. That's where we are right now, and it's embarrassing.